Hello, I'm Kyle Ferrier, a fellow and director of academic affairs at the Korea Economic Institute of America, and welcome to our event this morning entitled Between a Rock and a Hard Place, How South Korea Should Manage Its Relations with the United States and China. As today's program is part of our academic paper series, I wanted to remind everyone of two things. First is that you can find the paper associated with this event on our website, keia.org, under the analysis tab, as well as papers from previous academic paper series programs. And secondly, the deadline, I just want to remind everyone that the deadline to send in your paper proposals for next year's series is fast approaching. It's coming up this Friday, December 3rd. We're interested in a wide range of policy relevant topics related to the Korean Peninsula. And you can find the full call for paper proposals on our website. Again, the deadline is this Friday, December 3rd. It's a really fantastic opportunity to highlight your research for experts and just entering the field to those ranging from those who are more established in the field as well. And so I see our discussion at hand today as one of a continuation of one that we had in October with emerging experts looking at potential roles for South Korea amid great power competition. And while we won't be able to solve the challenges Korea faces today from the US-China rivalry in just two programs, our speaker today will shed more light on this issue that will continue to be one of the key motivating factors behind South Korea's foreign policy for years to come. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with Korea's current conundrum, and we're going to be getting into that a little bit discussion of it in a bit more detail shortly. So I'll just before I turn things over to Zhiqun, I just wanted to briefly share his bio. Dr. Zhiqun Zhu is professor of political science and international relations at Bucknell University, where until earlier this year, he was also chair of the International Relations Department. His teaching and research interests include Chinese politics and foreign policy, East Asian political economy, US-Asian relations, and international relations theories. He's taught all over the US and Asia, including positions at Hamilton College, Shanghai International Studies University, and Kyungbuk National University in Korea, to name just a few. We're grateful to have him here with us now. And with that, I'll turn things over to Zhiqun.
Thank you, Carl. I want to thank you and KEI for this opportunity to present my paper and share my perspectives on this important topic. So I prepared some slides. I'm going to share the screen with you, if it's okay. All right. All right. Can you see it now? Okay. Can you see it now?
I think we're having the same issue we're having earlier. Maybe if you stop sharing screen and restart, it should work.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. Okay. How about now? Okay, good. Okay. So sorry about that. So as Carl said, the topic is about how South Korea should manage its relations with the United States and China. Both are important, obviously. We all know that in 2015 and 16, South Korea had to make some painful and difficult decisions, right? At about the same time, China was launching its new Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, and the United States was pushing to install the missile defense system in Korea, South Korea. And both powers were trying to get South Korea on board. But of course, the United States strongly opposed the AIIB, and the United States also pressured its allies not to join the AIIB. And China, on the other hand, was strongly opposed to the missile defense program. So South Korea was stuck in the middle. But despite all the pressures, this is what happened. Eventually, South Korea did join the AIIB in December 2015. actually as a founding member. And in July 2016, South Korea allowed the United States to deploy THAAD missile defense program. So this is the background of this research paper, if you like, but it's part of a bigger project. I'm working on a bigger project on how the United States and its allies and partners are responding to China's rise, or in other words, how China's rise affects foreign policies of these countries. Now, specifically for this paper, I'm addressing South Korea's response. How has South Korea managed its relations with the two superpowers so far, and how should South Korea manage these two sets of relationships going forward? Here's some hypotheses. I would suggest that the more China's economic and diplomatic influence grows in U.S. allies and friends, the more likely these countries will adopt an independent approach towards China and not necessarily follow the U.S. leadership. And these countries may wish to maintain a certain degree of autonomy in their foreign policy, especially regarding China. Now, specifically for South Korea, I think South Korea has managed its relationship with United States and China remarkably well so far, but it's facing increasing pressure from both powers to take sides as the rivalry between the two big powers intensifies. So South Korea may not be able to continue with business as usual. Here's the central argument. Now, the argument is based on this reality, the fact on the ground. I think we tend to think that the United States is South Korea's traditional security patron, and China is South Korea's largest trading partner, which is true, of course. But the fact is, both the United States and China play crucial roles in both security and economic policies of South Korea. So based on this fact, my argument is twofold. First, it is in South Korea's national interest to maintain the status quo, meaning the current situation, the current structure, under which South Korea can continue to benefit from strong relations with both powers and maximize its national interests. Secondly, I think because the pressure is going to increase, so it is perhaps in South Korea's interest to consider forming a sort of a coalition of middle powers with other like-minded countries, so as to deflect pressure from the big powers and avoid the dilemma of having to pick a side. Now, the paper is based on this IPE theoretical framework, the concept called economics and security nexus. This is used to analyze how a state balances its challenges in its external relations, security and economic challenges. Now, these challenges may come from the same source, same country, or they may come from different sources. For example, in Southeast Asian countries cases, these countries are neighbors of China, and they have extensive economic trade relations with China. They also have very difficult complex political security relations with China. So they have to balance their different interests, especially Vietnam and the Philippines, for example, due to the South China Sea dispute. They at the same time they also have strong dynamic economic relations with China. So it's a challenge for them to balance these two sets of national security issues. Now, the challenge may also come from different sources. So in that case, these countries may adopt a policy called hedging. Again, using Southeast Asia as an example here. Many of these countries are kind of hedging between China and the United States. They have strengthened security ties with the United States At the same time, they have enhanced economic and trade relations with China. They are not going to pick sides. They are kind of hedging against the two powers. Now, this hedging actually also has applied to the South Korean case. But my argument is that that is not enough anymore. I propose a modified analytical framework, a kind of a dual-track economics security structure. This Korean concept, Ame Junjung, is kind of a traditional, classic security economics structure. Basically relying on the United States for security and treating China as the largest economic partner. That's still true, but I think it's misleading to suggest that the United States only provides security and China is just an important economic partner. Now, my argument is that the United States is also a major economic partner and China is also a key security partner for South Korea. So this dual track economic security connection means that South Korea will have to maintain good relations with both powers. It will not choose sides. So that's the security, that's the analytical framework. Now, some empirical data, this is very obvious to our audience, I believe, So first, the US ROK relations. First part is security, second part is economic and other dimensions, just to show that the US ROK relations are not just about security, right? It's also economic and also social, cultural. The alliance was formed in 1953. Today, we still have about 28,500 troops in South Korea. And this alliance is held as the linchpin of peace, security, and prosperity for Northeast Asia. And earlier this year, President Moon Jae-in became the second foreign leader to be invited to the White House by President Biden. Now, economically, of course, United States is also a key player. United States has been South Korea's second largest foreign investor. And South Korea is also Asia's second largest investor in the United States after Japan. Now, the two countries signed the free trade agreement back in 2007. The United States right now is South Korea's second largest trading partner, and South Korea is America's sixth largest. In other dimensions of the relationship, again, cultural, social, educational exchanges are very dynamic. Over 1.7 million Korean students have studied in the United States since 1955. Many of them have returned to South Korea and become leaders in many fields. China-South Korea relations, likewise, very important economically, but also in security and political and other dimensions as well. The two countries established diplomatic relations in 1992. Since then, trade has increased more than 37-fold. And China surged to become the largest trading partner of South Korea in 2003 and has maintained that status since then. The two countries signed a free trade agreement in 2015. They pledged to boost trade to 300 billion just a few years. I think right now they are upgrading the free trade agreement. In addition, both South Korea and China joined RCEP last year. That provides another venue for economic trade and other cooperations in economic affairs. And of course, in terms of security and political dimensions, China has been undoubtedly a key player in Korean Peninsula since the Korean War. And of course, that war is not officially ended yet. So North Korea remains South Korea's #1 security concern. As long as that's the policy of South Korea, and China will continue to be a major player in this regard. And of course, beyond the security dimension, economic, social, cultural exchanges between China and South Korea are also very dynamic. Easily, many Korean schools have all these international students, but almost half of international students come from China. That's very interesting, right? Now, a couple of cases to just demonstrate how complex this security economics dimension, this dual track structure works. I mentioned the THAAD earlier. So the United States actually tried to install this missile defense system roughly from 2013, 2014. South Korea has resisted, because there were lots of oppositions within South Korea. Very interesting, it's out of security concerns, out of environmental concerns, peace groups, and the cost, effectiveness. So there are protests against it, even within South Korea. And of course, China has strongly opposed it from the very beginning. So for quite a few years, South Korea was not willing to allow the United States to deploy the missile defense program. Now, eventually, I guess South Korea gave in, right? So in July 2016, a THAAD battery was installed in South Korean Air Force Base, about 200 kilometers southeast of Seoul. The China's opposition is based on this suspicion that the real target is China. This powerful radar system may be able to snoop on China's sensitive military facilities beyond the Korean border. And China was not able to really change Korea's mind. So after the THAAD decision was made, China swiftly imposed sanctions against South Korea, economic sanctions and also cultural sanctions, right? Korean businesses, especially retailers, Lotte, suffered. And Korea and entertainment businesses was also blocked in China, and Chinese tourists were also declined. Obviously it's a dilemma for South Korea. So in 2017, after Moon Jae-in came to office, he tried to repair relationship with China. So the South Korean government publicly announced the 3 no's: no additional THAAD deployment, no participation in the U.S. missile defense system, and no trilateral military alliances with the United States and Japan. So this is how South Korea is trying to kind of balancing relations with the United States and China. The THAAD missile system already kind of offended China, so it has to kind of try to elevate China's concerns and repair the relationship. Now, these are some photos showing the protests against THAAD, both within Korea and also in China. I'm not sure why those protests in China were holding the portrait of Mao. I need to figure out why. So another case is North Korea, and we all know that negotiations or talks about North Korea's nuclear program have been stalled. There's no progress. And from the U.S. side, U.S. policies have not been consistent all the time, right? From Obama's strategic patience to Trump's maximum pressure. The U.S. approach emphasizes its power, its leverage, its supreme military and economic power to force North Korea to capitulate, to denuclearize. I call it a hard approach, right? The Chinese approach is a little bit different. China emphasized the traditional friendship fostered by previous generations leaders on both sides, China and North Korea, and also to the current era. Xi Jinping calls it a new historic era, right? So China's approach emphasizes history, geopolitical reality, and peaceful means, and I call it a soft approach. Now in South Korea, of course, we all know that the politics, is divided between conservatives and liberals or progressives. For both progressives and conservatives, of course, U.S. ROK alliance is the pillar of South Korean foreign policy. There's no doubt about it. However, the progressives tend to also emphasize the inter-Korean relations and try to improve relations with North Korea and also China. Now, this South Korean politics used to be dominated by conservatives, right? But since Kim Dae-jung came to power in 1998 with his Sunshine policy, and his successor Roh Moo-hwan, his peace and prosperity policy, 10 years of engagement with North Korea. So this liberal approach seemed to have, gained some momentum, right? Park Geun-hye, from the conservative camp, was even considered as somebody leaning towards China, right? That's very interesting because she was the only leader from a U.S. From U.S. allies to attend Beijing's military parade in 2015, right, marking the 70th anniversary of end of World War II. So President Park sitting next to President Xi, it's a very striking image. It's a bar chart showing the presidents of the ROK from the very beginning, Syngman Rhee, 1948, right, and their political leanings, right, from the beginning to Moon Jae-in right now. So you can see most presidents were kind of from the conservative camps, right? Since the Kim Dae-jung came to office 1998, the liberals have heavily influenced South Korea's approach to North Korea and China as well. So basically, we can argue that because of China's strong influence on North Korea, the shortest cut to Pyongyang is through Beijing, as they say, right? Yeah. Now, my paper also talk about other situations, though. My suggestions here is that South Korea is not the only country that is facing this dilemma, right? You have to deal with the two big powers. South Korea definitely is not alone. Singapore, Israel, Italy, Vietnam, Australia, Indonesia, just to name a few, also face similar dilemmas. Now, very interesting, of course, Australia is, I think Australia had tried to balance relations with the United States and China until about a year ago, right? I think Australia obviously had made the choice to side with the United States. And so it's kind of a outlier in this group of countries, right? That's another topic. So I also mentioned Israel in the paper. Israel, of course, has these strong relations with the United States, and to a large extent, the United States, just like South Korea, the United States is the security guarantor of Israel. But Israel also has this long, historical relations with China, going back to the early 20th century, and also during World War II, right? These Jewish refugees were welcomed in China. So the Jewish state, the Jews, have this special relationship with China. So they want to develop strong relations with China as well. But the United States has a lot of concerns, right? In 2000, for example, United States forced Israel to cancel some military deals with China, right? I think it's in 2000. And also 2005, another incident also involving Israelis planned military sales to China, right? But more recently, of course, we heard about this new Haifa port, right? It's very interesting. This apparently is part of China's Belt Road Initiative, right? This company from China, Shanghai International Port Group, won a bid to build it in 2015. It's very interesting. My friends in Israel told me that actually the Haifa city government approached the United States, U.S. Embassy in Israel, to give the U.S. The right of first refusal to ask a U.S. Embassy to help to identify some American businesses to build this port. But after a few months, there's no response from the U.S. side. So at that point, they decided to go global and invited the international bidders to bid for this project. And that's how this company from Shanghai won a bid. So very soon, the United States regretted, right? And then it became, initially it was not an issue, but as the new port was built, a lot of concerns emerged in Washington because that's where, the Israeli strategic forces are located. And the new port is also close to where U.S. Sixth Fleet ships would dock. U.S. concern basically is out of security, right? They suggest that maybe China will use the new port to spy on U.S. and Israeli facilities. But I think U.S. concern is also about the expansion of Chinese influence in the region, right? So Israel faced a lot of pressure. Still, they proceeded with this project. And actually, the new port was completed and became operational early this year. So I like this comment from a former Israeli diplomat. You have some like-minded countries like Israel, South Korea, and others, right? For these countries, the United States is very important. U.S.-China rivalry is here to stay. They are either small or medium-sized countries. The United States is the most important ally, but these countries really need to look out for their own interests. So that's why I think South Korea perhaps can form this coalition of middle powers with countries like Israel to kind of deflect the pressure from the United States and China and firmly defend their own national interests. So quickly, let me just summarize. I think we, probably people both inside and outside Korea, can agree that the U.S. ROK alliance is the pillar of South Korean foreign policy. And South Korea is already kind of in the U.S. camp by default because of the alliance, right? And there's no doubt that the security and the military cooperation between South Korea and the United States is rock solid. But South Korea has tried to seek certain degree of autonomy in its foreign policy and has not always followed the U.S. leadership. For example, South Korea has refrained from publicly taking sides in U.S.-China rivalry. It has been lukewarm to the U.S. free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, and either low-key or uninterested in other U.S. initiatives, such as the Quad, the Five Eyes, and AUKUS, which are arguably aimed at China, right? South Korea has actually joined the China-initiated AIIB and China's BRI project, despite U.S. pressure. Its approach to North Korea under a progressive government actually also seems more in alignment with China's soft approach. Now, facing this dual-track economics and security structure, South Korea has tried to maintain this balance with both great powers. And I think we can argue that it has done so remarkably well so far. And it is likely to continue to maintain strong relations with both powers. Now, of course, the election in March 2022 may produce a different president, maybe from a conservative camp. But I would still argue that even a president from a conservative camp will not be disrupt relations with China. Will still try to maintain a fine balance between China and the United States. So finally, to resist the growing pressure in the future, I think South Korea may wish to form a coalition of like-minded countries in order to defend and maximize its own interests. And I think I just finished in 30 minutes, right? That's the time Kyle gave me, right? Kamsahamnida, and I'll be happy to engage in some discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I think one of the strengths of your paper is that you take something that is sort of so taken as a given in Korea, the idea of Anmi Kyungjung, as you said, the security for the United States and economics for China, and you did a wonderful job of disaggregating it and really diving into it a little bit more to show it's actually not so simple. And I think that came across very well in your presentation, and you added a lot of color to your analysis. And I just wanted to ask some questions to you before I turn to the audience for some questions. But as a reminder, for those who are joining in via YouTube, if you have any questions, I would please encourage you to use the comment function, the chat function on the right side of the YouTube video to leave your questions for us to get to in our discussion. But I will use my moderator's privilege to ask some questions to you first. And as I sort of alluded to earlier, this event paper is embedded in a larger conversation about what South Korea really should do amid great power rivalry between the United States and China. So the core issue that that Korea faces right now. And in this conversation, there's basically two schools of thought, or at least that's how I see the conversation breaking down. On the one hand, you have one school saying strategic ambiguity must be continued, this idea of not making a choice between China and the United States. This is what South Korea is doing and what South Korea must continue to do. But on the other hand, you have those who say South Korea must abandon strategic ambiguity and replace it with something else because it's unsustainable. Based off your paper and your presentation, I think everyone can clearly see you fall within the former, the idea that strategic ambiguity must be continued in some way, shape, or form. But what would you say to those who assert Korea is eventually going to have to make a choice, and it's better for Korea to make a choice now than push off a decision for later?
Thank you for that comment, and a good question. I think to answer that question, I mean, basically you want to ask those folks who have these concerns or have this question, what is in South Korea's best national interest, to publicly take a side. Does that serve South Korea's interest? I mean, we all know that, I'm not talking about, how China may threaten South Korea or use this coercive diplomacy against South Korea, as demonstrated after the THAAD episode. But for South Korea, seriously, North Korea is a major issue. I mean, how can you solve this problem without cooperation from China? That's the fundamental issue here. In the paper, I also talk about the growing anti-China sentiment inside South Korea. I didn't mention in the presentation. That's an issue the South Korean government perhaps should also deal with. But still, from the national national interest perspective, if you publicly take a side with the United States against China, will that serve South Korea's interest? Will you be able, solve this North Korean problem? Right now, we all know that South Korea and the United States are trying to come up with this end of war declaration, right? And I think right now, actually, both Koreas are approaching China for consultation. Obviously, China's attitude on this matter is very important. So, well, basically, simply put, I would still argue that it is in the best interest of South Korea to maintain the status quo, to continue to consolidate the alliance with the United States, because that's indispensable, right? On the other hand, there's so many issues and also many national interests that are involving China. There's no way that South Korea can simply just decouple from China or just antagonize China, because that's going to be counterproductive. I don't think it is in South Korea's national interest. Despite the many differences between South Korea and China, despite the growing anti-China sentiment within South Korea, I think the government-to-government relationship still remains strong, and I think that relationship should continue because, again, it serves South Korea's national interest.
And it's a very compelling argument, but we'll see how much South Korea is able to maintain its current position as the rivalry gets more intense. But you sort of referenced this in your answer, and you also made reference to something you talked about in your paper. And I just wanted to touch upon public opinion. You talked about growing anti-Chinese sentiment in South Korea. I know from polls that we've done here and other organizations have done, there's a better appreciation for South Korea among Americans. And in one of your slides, you showed a protest in China against South Korea from a few years back related to the THAAD incident. I'm not asking for specific numbers here, but do you have a sense of the perception of Korea now in China? Is it still tarnished from the THAAD dispute? Does that factor into Chinese thinking about its relationship with South Korea? You mentioned that there is strong government-to-government ties. How are the people-to-people ties in your sense? Is there any bottom-up interest, bottom-up-driven interest in doing more with Korea, or is there still a lingering sense of dissatisfaction over the THAAD dispute a few years back?
Good question. I would take all these opinion polls with a grain of salt. I mean, I think we have to be careful. We have to interpret these opinion polls. Put them in a broader context. Just like, for example, in the United States, right? Public opinion towards China has also declined in the past few years. But has the Chinese public opinion towards the United States deteriorated? I mean, the answer is yes, to some extent, but not. I don't think we want to exaggerate that. Why? Just look at how many Chinese students keep coming to the United States. These are the young folks, who tend to be more nationalistic, right? But they may become a little bit disappointed at the United States, but they still keep coming and study here, live here. Likewise, public opinion towards South Korea, I definitely declined to some extent after that. But I think that was a few years ago. I think now, people have short memories, right? I mean, K-pop, this Korean drama, have become popular again in China. And again, from the cultural exchange perspective, education exchange, I mentioned in my presentation, most Korean colleges, universities, look at the international student body, easily about half of the students are from China. So that's still pretty strong. So this basic structure, has not changed, And I would argue that this anti-China sentiment in Korea is consistent with this global anti-China atmosphere. Again, I don't know whether we should take it so seriously, I mean, come on, more people in Korea are anti-China than they are anti-Japan now. I mean, that's very interesting. Maybe so, right? But I kind of doubt, because the historical issues between South Korea and Japan are so troubled, So according to one opinion poll, over half of Koreans think China is going to be a major threat after the unification, right? Only about 1/3 says that Japan, right? I could be wrong, right? But I will not take those opinion polls too seriously. I mean, I think what happens in Korea, in this public opinion of China, will change as the global attitude towards China changes. Because right now we are living in this age where anti-China is kind of the thing, right? You're supposed to be anti-China, right? You're not supposed to say anything good about China. So in this global atmosphere, I mean, it's not surprising to me to see anti-China feelings that grow in Korea, in Israel, in everywhere, really. I mean, where can you see any pro-China feelings are growing nowadays? Nowhere, right? So this has something to do with the global competition between China and the United States and this global media portrayal of China in such a negative light. You cannot expect anything good about China right now, right? So I'm hopeful that these strong societal, these educational and cultural exchanges, and the connections between China and South Korea will actually grow in the years ahead. I mean, next year, 2022, the two countries will celebrate 30 or 40, 92, 30 years of diplomatic relations, right? I mean, that would be a good opportunity for both sides to, to re-emphasize what has brought them together, what their common interests are. So I'm not worried about those public opinion polls. Thank you.
I think those are all great points, and it will be interesting to see how if the trajectory as it stands continues. And I kind of wanted to ask a little bit about that with the next question before getting to some questions from the audience. And the big issue as it relates to Korea right now is who's going to be president after the election coming up in spring of next year. And you kind of sort of suggested that there is a set trajectory that we're going on. And I'm wondering if there's any, at least towards China, I wonder if there's any room for vacillation, any room to move on that, either up or below where we currently are in relation to China, but also with the United States. And the big possible change would be the switch of a progressive administration to a conservative administration if Yoon Suk-yeol wins the presidency next year. Could this impact how South Korea sees its relationships between China and the United States? And I'm thinking on North Korea, because North Korea might be less of an issue for a conservative candidate, at least the way that it's been played out under the progressive administrations, with a lot of forward-led. It's been forward, heavy-led with diplomacy. If there's less of an emphasis on that, if you will, if there's a more traditionally conservative stance on North Korea, could China be seen as a less important partner on resolving that? And then maybe that could also lead to a stronger reliance in the U.S., which is what conservatives normally have or they traditionally have pushed for. But at the same time, the conservatives are also now thinking about, or at least a talking point is for South Korea to acquire its own nuclear weapons, which could also severely strain the relationship with the United States. So there's a number of factors here that I think could disrupt relationships with China, with the United States. And it's kind of hard to predict, but I'm just wondering what you think are, if the election could have a large possible impact on how South Korea sees itself in this relationship, or stuck between a rock and a hard place, as you put it.
Well, I wish I have the crystal ball. I can predict what's going to happen, right, in the next few years. I think as of now, we don't know actually who may win this election, right? I think, based on my reading, the two candidates, Lee Jae-myung and Yoon Suk-yeol from a liberal, from a Democratic Party, and from the People Power Party, respectively, are kind of neck and neck right now, right? So let's assume that Yoon from the opposition party, from conservative camp, will win next year. I kind of doubt that there will be drastic changes in China-ROK relations for all the reasons I just outlined earlier. But also, this China-ROK relations will also be influenced by US-China relations to a great extent. So we have President here, President Biden, who has tried to reverse some of the policies put in place by Trump, and the recent virtual meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping shows that between Biden and Xi Jinping shows that President Biden is pragmatic. He realizes that the U.S.-China competition and rivalry will not go away, but he's also seeking cooperation with China on important issues, including climate change, pandemic, and I guess also including North Korea, right? Because right now, the Biden administration's North Korean policy is kind of unclear right now, right? I think, he has, unfortunately, it's not his priority right now, it seems. But I assume that soon, maybe next year, he will turn his attention to North Korea. And if that happens, again, going back to my argument earlier, how can you solve the North Korean issue without China's full participation and cooperation? That's just not going to work. I mean, we all know that. I think that's a major constraint on South Korea. Even if even a conservative president who may be more pro-America, who are tougher towards North Korea, they may not do much about the relations with China. In addition to the extensive economic ties, right? But in terms of security, in terms of China's influence on North Korea, how can you, overcome this hurdle, if you like? If China chooses not to cooperate, there'll be no solution to the North Korean problem. So overall, I feel like the U.S. China South Korea relations will remain stable. There will be some tactical changes, obviously, because a conservative president will always be more pro-American and kind of more suspicious of China. That's always the case. But I mean, and they will take some tactical changes in the policy. But strategically, in terms of overall structure, I doubt they will or they can't do anything about it, actually.
Yeah, that seems to be about the case. I would agree with most of what you just said there, too. So now we'll shift over to some questions that we had come in from the audience. We talked a little bit about Japan earlier, so I wanted to get to this question first. How does China view the South Korea-Japan relationship? Does China wish to stoke the tension between them in order to weaken the trilateral alliances involving the United States?
Well, I think China is very sensitive to this idea of a trilateral alliance, between Japan, Korea, and the United States. So to some extent, I guess, China will take advantage of the division between Japan and South Korea. I don't think, China will actively promote, the relationship between Japan and South Korea. I mean, it's their business, right? So China is very sensitive to this, and I don't think China has any agenda here. It's really up to them. I mean, even the United States cannot do anything about it, right? I mean, just a couple weeks ago, right, when Deputy Secretary of State Sherman was hosting the deputy vice foreign ministers from Japan, from South Korea, right? they were trying to hold a press conference after the meeting. And then the Japanese and the Korean vice foreign ministers just didn't show up, right? Because they had some dispute, right? Doctoral, right? This long-standing territorial dispute, but also historical issues, comfort women, right? There's a deep suspicion between Japan and South Korea. So I mean, obviously, we all hope that as democracies, as two U.S. allies, they can overcome those difficulties. They can improve their relations. But this has been going on for more than 7 decades. They still have not been able to figure out how to improve their relationship. I don't think it's in U.S. interest, right, to see the division between the two allies. But I don't think there's anything China can do about it. I would suggest that China perhaps would just take advantage of that. And China will strongly oppose this idea of this trilateral alliance, because if that happens, obviously China will be the target, right? I mean, so I guess China is justified really to oppose that kind of alliance. For the U.S. ROK alliance, I mean, you can argue that it's for North Korea, right? I mean, China probably can buy it, although probably China does not believe it, right? But if you have a trilateral cooperation, trilateral alliance, I mean, that's too obvious for China. So there's no way China will like that idea. So the current problem between South Korea and Japan probably is something that China likes.
It would seem that way. The next question we have coming in is one I had myself, and this sounds like another paper in and of itself. But when you say the coalitions of like-minded nations South Korea should join, do you have any thoughts on what this might look like? What groupings would this include? Would this be something like MITCA or within larger platforms like the WTO? In a sense, what sort of work would a Middlepower Coalition do, and how feasible might this be to coordinate?
Yeah, well, this is just an idea. I don't think we're going to talk about a new international organization. No, I don't think there will be a new group or international organization to be established to deal with the rivalry between China and the United States. I think this is a kind of a loosely formed coalition, loosely formed group of like-minded countries. I mean, Singapore comes to mind. Singapore has been very vocal in opposing this intense rivalry between the two powers. They don't like. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has repeatedly said that Singapore doesn't want to choose sides between the two great powers, and they want to maintain good relations with both powers. So countries like Singapore could obviously share the issues, share the dilemma the South Korea faces now. So that's why I propose this idea of forming this loosely structured coalition. Now, you can ask a lot of countries, probably they have the same issue here, right? Germany, Italy, Vietnam, Canada, I mean, which country will really want to, intentionally offend the United States or antagonize China? I don't see it. I mean, there might be some countries out there, right? But I don't think, for most countries, really, it's not a choice. I mean, in the paper I mentioned, the former speaker of the South Korean National Assembly, what's his name, Moon, right? He said, you ask these countries to choose between the United States and China. It's like you ask a kid whether you like your mom or dad. It's ridiculous, right? I mean, I think that's probably a consensus of many of the countries that face this kind of dilemma. So that's why I think this coalition perhaps can work. I mean, these countries can help each other, can reinforce this idea, and they can also send a signal, this powerful message to both China and the United States, look, don't force us to make a choice. And actually, you guys should lower your tensions between you two. And more importantly, we're not going to choose because it's not in our interest to make a choice. We want to develop strong relations with both of you, right? So I think that message, should also be sent out through this coalition. So I would argue that this idea will be constructive, will be helpful to lower tensions between China and the United States, and also to help those countries to defend their national interests.
I would agree with you on that, but we'll see if anyone takes you up on your proposal. In the sake of time, we have 2 questions left, so I'll just take them together. The first question asks, is there realistically any chance of cooperation between the United States and China to resolve North Korea's nuclear issue? What do you think of China being playing a key role in helping the United States and South Korea really help denuclearize North Korea? What's the chance on that? And the second question is it correct to say that China has been reluctant to escalate tensions with the US until now and is reluctantly being pushed into a Cold War equilibrium?
Well, they are kind of related questions. Okay, so regarding North Korea, I would argue that China's policy towards North Korea has been consistent. There are several points about China's policy towards North Korea. Number one, peace and security in Northeast Asia. Right. Number 2, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, not just North Korea, denuclearization of the whole peninsula. Right. Number 3, I think China advocates peaceful resolution of any disputes. So that those policies have been consistent. So if the United States is serious about resolving the North Korean problem, yes, I do see room for cooperation between China and the United States, because China and the United States actually share this same objective of denuclearizing North Korea. But of course, China also wants to denuclearize the whole peninsula. But the problem is, what kind of approach you want to take? Hard approach, soft approach, right? Diplomacy or sanctions, right? I mean, we know that sanctions don't work, have not worked really. I mean, diplomacy is the art of give and take. So you keep asking North Korea to just denuclearize, to abandon the nuclear program. Why should they do it? What would they get in return, right? We have not figured out that issue here. We keep asking North Korea, you cannot do it. You cannot become a nuclear power. You should abandon nuclear program. That sounds so condescending, right? Without giving North Korea any incentive. So I think, if the United States is serious, I think definitely China will work with the United States to help North Korea to denuclearize. But there are some conditions. You want to treat North Korea as a normal state. You want to normalize relations with North Korea. You want to even perhaps establish diplomatic relations with North Korea. This is not an ideological issue. This is not a political issue. It's a diplomatic issue here, right? And I think, in this regard, this end of war declaration actually is a step in the right direction. I think South Korea is, President Moon especially is pushing for this before he steps down. And as of now, the United States seems kind of lukewarm or not so enthusiastic, right? Because the United States fears that, North Korea should denuclearize first. And the United States also fears that if this declaration is issued, maybe the US ROK alliance may weaken, right? So the United States has a lot of concerns. Well, that's the exact issue. That's the exact problem. I think the United States needs to put itself in others' shoes, in North Korea's shoes, in China's shoes, in South Korean shoes, and see whether they can come up with a common solution to this problem. So overall, I'm optimistic that China, United States, and South Korea, and maybe also Japan and Russia involved here, they can come up with some solution to this problem. But the key here is that you cannot just unilaterally ask North Korea to do this and that. you have to give them something that is so attractive that they will strike a deal with you. Now, very briefly, second part of the question about this rivalry between China and the United States. Has China been kind of forced to take a more confrontation approach towards the United States? I mean, yes and no, right? I mean, after 4 years of the Trump administration, I think China got a relief, really. Right now, I think they really appreciate that President Biden is kind of trying to reverse some of the policies, not completely, but President Biden has said that we will seek cooperation with China on issues of common interest. So I don't think China is really seeking confrontation with the United States. In a large extent, to a large extent, really China is basically responding to the policies out of Washington, and we all know that the policy from Washington are so aggressive towards China, to say the least, right? I mean, nowadays, in Washington, even in Carl, you are in Washington. Nowadays in Washington, they used to be like panda huggers and dragon slayers in Washington, right? Nowadays, everybody's a dragon slayer. Everybody holds a hammer in their hand, and just everything from China looks like a nail. You want to hammer it down, right? So I'm not trying to defend, the China's policies. I mean, obviously, China also has been aggressive, right, in South China Sea, in dealing with some other countries, But in terms of U.S.-China relations, really, both sides need to calm down and look at the big picture. If they really want to lower tensions, this confrontation approach does not serve the interest of anybody. I think this pragmatic approach, cooperation despite differences, is a more reasonable approach. And I applaud President Biden's, new approach towards China. And I think there's room for U.S. and China to improve relations in the years ahead.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I'm sure there's a lot more we can get to, but as I said earlier, there's no way we're going to resolve these issues in a program or two. So we'll have to have you back on next year or sometime soon to follow up on our discussion. But for those of you who are watching and want more of this discussion, I would encourage you to please check out Zhiqun's paper on our website, again, keia.org. And again, if you're interested in having a program similar to this next year to highlight your own research, I would encourage you to apply for our academic paper series for next year's series. Again, the deadline is December 3rd, this Friday. So with that, thank you again, Zhiqun, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, and I hope to talk to you more about these issues in the near future.
Thank you, Carl. Hope to see you again in person.
Yes, hopefully next time.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.